Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jamie Eads. Hey, what's up, everybody? Jamie Eads here with you. Thanks for tuning in to the Drum Shuffle. This is episode number 12. We've got a great show for you today. Before we get to our guest, I want to remind everybody, go ahead and hit the subscribe button to whatever service you're using to listen in today. Leave us a rating or review as well. It helps us tremendously. Keep your emails coming. Our email address is thedrumshufflepodcast@gmail.com. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com. You can find more information about me over at jamieeads.com. We have the fantastic Jason Smay joining us here in just a second. Jason is the drummer in JD McPherson's fantastic band. They are on tour right now, and we're going to talk all about that. You also may know Jason from his time in Los Straitjackets. It's fantastic instrumental band. We're going to talk all about that as well, so stay tuned. Los Cabos drumsticks may be the best kept secret from drummers today. Los Cabos drumsticks makes the finest tools to touch a drummer's hands in the business. The best news, almost every popular stick size is available in both white hickory and red hickory. If you don't know what red hickory is, it's made from the heartwood of the hickory tree, unlike regular white hickory, which is made from sapwood. Red hickory drumsticks will hold up to even the hardest hitting drummers. Their durability comes from the density of the wood, but they do not sacrifice the feel. Please visit LosCabosDrumsticks.com to learn more about their products. And don't forget to ask at your favorite retailer for Los Cabos drumsticks. All right, everybody. As mentioned, we have the wonderful Jason Smay joining us. Jason is playing in JD McPherson's band. Their new record is called Undivided Heart and Soul, and it's just simply a fantastic record. If you're not familiar with JD McPherson's music, please go check them out. Just fantastic. These guys are on tour right now, and they are all over the country. They will be coming to a city near you very soon. They're out through the end of July, so grab a ticket. Go see Jason's incredible drumming on this tour. We are very happy to have my good friend Jason Smay joining the Drum Shuffle. Hey, Jason, how's it going today?
Good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for taking the time and coming on to the Drum Shuffle. We really appreciate it.
Oh, no, man. That's my pleasure completely.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're honored to have you on the show. So, Jason, tell our listeners how you got started as a drummer and where you grew up and kind of the beginnings of your story, if you don't mind.
Sure, man. It's pretty funny. I grew up in just outside of Rochester, New York, and actually lived there until about 2 years ago when I moved to Nashville. I've always been into music. I mean, as a little kid, and I honestly didn't want to play the drums when I was a little kid. I wanted to play saxophone. I was obsessed with like tenor saxophone.
Yeah, sure.
And my mom was like, "No, your dad used to play the drums. We have drums. We're not spending any money on a tenor saxophone. So if you want to play an instrument, it's going to be the drums." And I was like, "I don't want to play the drums." But it was, that was like mom spoke, and my dad was like, "Well, we got drums, so let's just go to the local music store and get you some sticks and some drum heads, and we'll fix up these old drums." And I just started playing. My dad showed me some stuff, and I just loved listening to music, and my parents loved music, and there was just always music on. And I just, I think I started taking some private lessons, I think it was like the end of my third grade year, in elementary school, and fourth grade, you could start band lessons, in school, just the general music teacher would teach, all the instruments. So it was kind of like, you just would get a basic knowledge, and like a basic entry to learning to read. And then, you're supposed to take it upon yourself. But I was getting like a private lesson with an actual performing, drummer, local guy. And, I just loved it, man. Like all I did was practice like all the time, and was always listening to music and trying to play to the radio and just had that genuine, in general music, like that's all it was, and, so that's how it all started for me. And then just growing up, just sticking with that. I would take lessons from like different teachers, like I would take lessons from one guy for, I don't know, maybe like a year or a year and a half. And then my parents would be like, you should switch and take from someone else. Cause like, you're kind of like sounding like that guy, like in the drum room, like my parents would sit outside, in the little music store, and I'd be in there playing, and my dad would be like, it's kind of hard to tell. Not totally. Obviously, when you're a teenager, you're still learning, and I'm still in awe of what I watch, like, drummers do. And I'm like, Jesus, I wish I could play like that. Like everyone has their thing, and like when you don't, and when it's not your thing, it's like amazing to you, or at least it's amazing to me to watch other drummers and be like, damn, how does that guy do that? Like, what is he doing? But like in a general sense, like my dad would be like, man, he's playing like he's starting to sound like the teacher, because, I would practice like constantly. Like I just would always, like, I don't mean like an hour a day. Like, I would come home from school. Like if I had any homework, it would be done so fast. I might as well not even have done it, 'cause I didn't even care. You know what I mean? Like, and I just would start playing drums, man. And then I, eat dinner and go back and play drums until it was like, literally my parents were like, okay, you really need to just go to bed,
Yeah.
And
so you were doing some hardcore woodshedding.
Totally, man.
Yeah.
Totally. And then when I was like 15, 16, I started like meeting like older musicians, because my dad was taking me to see shows, and, like some jazz guys, and, I sat in with this one band. They were like an R&B band, and they had a sax player, and he was like, man, he's like, you got a pretty good groove. He's like, you need to come out on Sundays to my jazz jam, and he's like, I'll get you to sit in. And I was like, really? And I was like, man, it's a chance to play. I'm going,
Sure.
So my dad would truck me to the other side of the city, I like every Sunday. And like, I was like a 15-year-old kid. I had no thought of like, oh, this is a little over my head. I shouldn't do this, like, I was like, yeah, I'll play, like, he'd go up there, and like, I just remember the first 6 months, they would let me sit in on like one song. You know what I mean?
Right.
Be like, okay, well, let's give this kid a chance, and they were all like really, really super nice guys, and they were really encouraging, and then like, I don't know, after a year, I'd like play 3 or 4 songs, but it just inspired me to keep practicing, and like getting hardcore into bebop, and, and then, I started taking with this other guy, in Rochester who is literally probably, I would put him up there with any of like the jazz guys that I look up to, man. This guy is like extremely talented. His name's Mike Polito. And he plays with like New York guys. He goes down to New York and plays, and he's a monster bebop drummer, like real traditional sense. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, he sounds like, he can play Philly Joe stuff, and he can play Art Blakey stuff, and you're just like, that guy's got it. You know what I mean? And he's like the sweetest dude, and he was like really patient with me. I took from him for like 2 years, where I was like, I had like a pretty confident, like, I could go and play jazz. You know what I mean? Like, I was trying to get jazz gigs, and like, I'm not Brian Blade or, Joe Farnsworth or any of those guys, you know what I mean? But like, you know what I mean? Like, and now you would only get better if you kept playing. But in Rochester at that time, I don't know what it is right now, but like, there's only like 1 or 2 places that would play. You could get a jazz gig, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And it's like, okay, so I got this world-class guy that I was taking lessons from. It's like playing jazz in Rochester on those gigs.
Right.
And then there's this other guy that was really good. And then there's this other, there's like 3 main guys that were like really killer jazz guys in like 1 or 2 places to play. on a Friday or a Saturday. So it's like, I gotta branch out here and start playing other music because at that point I was kind of like, I just wanted to play. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It wasn't, I was thinking I'm doing all this practicing, but if there's no gigs to be had, like I either gotta move, which 18 or 19, doesn't really make sense, or, start playing other music. And it was like one of those jazz gigs that I actually did have that there was some there's a couple blues guys that showed up and, they talked to me after the gig. They're like, man, you ever play like R&B music? And I was like, well, not necessarily in a band situation, but I mean, I love that stuff, and they're like, well, you should come out. You got a really cool swing, and you're playing. And,
right. So it was an opportunity to branch out a little bit at that point.
Yeah. And I was like, well, shit, man, if you like, and then I started playing, like on the sort of like the blues R&B circuit, because, one guy that I took lessons from before I took from this guy, Mike, was another guy named Mike, but he was like a traditional blues guy, but he played a lot of Latin music too.
Right.
And he taught me to play some Latin grooves, but like he taught me how to keep do a really, really solid, swing and shuffle,
Sure.
Which I kind of walked away from for a little while because when you start playing with jazz guys, they don't want to play shuffle stuff. They want it to be, they don't want to hear the backbeat. You know what I mean?
Right. They want you to swing. Right.
It's total swing, but they don't want to hear the backbeat, and I kind of found like once I went back to start playing like the R&B stuff, I found like a lot of joy in it, man. Like, cause it's like, it can be really fun music. And I was like, man, I found a way to swing in work, and it was like, in shuffling, and like, I just like have this thing, like I really love to play shuffles, man, like in the right situation, man, with guys that want to play shuffles, it's great for me personally. Like I love that more than when I played any jazz gigs. You know what I mean? Looking back.
Right.
It's like, I just got more out of that. And it just, I was like, it seemed more natural fit for me to play that style than to try and play bebop, even though I really love bebop, like sometimes, it's just what you love isn't what you do. You know what I mean? Like you can still love it, but it's not really what you thought you were going to, you know what I mean?
Sure.
So I kind of realized quick that I was like, well, maybe I'm not really a jazz drummer, but shuffling is pretty cool. And then I went on to discover like all this, all the Bill Doggett stuff, is like, it's jazz. I mean, that's jazz music, man. I mean, like he is a great jazz organist and, but all his stuff was like combo stuff that people could dance to. And it was like the guy was shuffling, man. And it was like, wait, this is kind of like a mix of both. And then, there's so many groups like that. Earl Bostic band was another great, King recording artist that like all his stuff. I was played in this one rock and roll band and we would call that stuff jukebox jazz. Cause it was like, it was like very jazz oriented, but it was like, you could almost classify it as sort of like early rock and roll because you could dance to it and it like had a groove and,
right. It was more acceptable to the masses, or accessible, I should say. Yeah. And, and
I was like, yeah, man, this is really cool too. And so I don't know, man, I started getting into the roots scene, through the blues scene. And, one thing led to another, I started playing a lot of blues gigs. And then, this Western swing guy, like, it was really weird. It was like at the same club. I started playing at this one club down in Rochester called Shep's Paradise, which was like a blues and jazz club. And, I was playing down there like, I don't know, 2-3 times a month with different bands, on the blues circuit, and, I was in there one night and this dude showed up and he was like total cowboy, man. And I was like, man, this guy's out of place, like this is like, but a lot of guys knew him, a lot of musicians knew him. And, he was like he's pretty young guy, but he had like a functioning Western. And he was like looking for a new drummer and he was like, man, he goes, I see you playing all over town. And he's like, you got a really good swing groove, And he's like, you ever play Western swing music? And I was like, nah, I don't even know what it is, man. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
I had never heard that classification of music, you know?
So you hadn't been baptized into the Bob Wills yet, right?
No, none of that, man. And he was like, well, here, come out, check this out, and, went outside to his van, not creepily went out to his van, but like, he's like, yeah, come here. Well, check this out. Tell me if you like this, and he was like playing me this Bob Wills stuff, and he was playing me, some of his stuff. And I was like, man, that's cool. And he's like, would you be interested in doing some gigs? And I was like, sure. And he's like, man, I got a tour starts, like next week. You interested in going on the road? And I was like, hell yeah.
Absolutely.
It was like, yeah, man, for sure. And that was like my first road gig, was playing with this Western swing guy. And, it went terribly wrong. Honestly, the band did, like, but it was like my first chance of getting out of town in a band. And, a lot of things that, you learn from starting out, like, okay, now I know how to avoid this thing. And, like it was a crash course, but
yeah, well, in that first experience, you're either in or out after it's over, I mean,
yeah. And I was basically out. I'll be honest with you, man. I was kind of like, you know what, man, if this is what it is, I'm good. Like, I'll continue to work in a machine shop, 4 days a week, 5 days a week, and I'll play 3-4 nights a week, and I'm good, like I'm okay with that, And my wife was like, are you kidding? Like, this is what you've always dreamed of. Like, just because that guy's, not the right guy for you, there's got to be other things, And I'm like, I don't know, babe. I was like,
right.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy, like, and I'm a pretty, mild guy. I'm not a partier, and for me, it's more about playing music and having a band and being like in a good band than it is just about the free beer and
sure.
Sure. fans or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, to me, it's like, I want to make music. I don't want to just like,
right.
whatever.
Well, so you're one of those guys that, and we don't know each other well, but you are the guy that, you understate everything kind of thing. And you don't, understand how incredible you are as a player. I mean, I really, I mean,
oh man,
I was having a conversation with one of our mutual friends that hooked us up, and I'm going to give a shout out to Josh Touchton.
Yeah, man.
But we were sitting there talking about you. I hope your ears weren't burning, but we both want to cut off your left hand and attach it to our own bodies, because for people that may not be familiar with your playing, and we'll talk about some of the bigger gigs, in just a second. But if somebody hasn't seen you play, don't hesitate. Get on YouTube, look up Jason Smay, because you are one of the few guys besides Stuart Copeland that I know of that can get the power that you get playing traditional grip. It's unreal, man. It's just unreal.
Oh, thanks, man. Well, I appreciate that. Well, that's really nice of you to say that, man. I really do appreciate it.
It's 100% honest. And, and that probably comes from your upbringing in the jazz gigs. Honestly, that's how you learned to play, and you've adapted that over the years.
Sure. Well, I can tell you, like, I really worked as a kid, I mean, probably like 9-10 years old, like just studying Buddy Rich videos. Like my mom and dad bought me like they used to put them out, man, like the drumming videos, and it would be all like the old footage of big band era guys, and there'd be a lot of Buddy Rich stuff and Gene Krupa, and I think there was like, it wasn't so much great footage of like Sid Catlett, but I was a big Sid Catlett fan, man, because like I just thought he was like the coolest guy and like had like a really good gig, and like he swung really well. And then I got into Davey Tuff, and it was like a Davey Tuff fan, but like footage of him's kind of hard to find. But what I obsessed about was like this, like the raw power that Buddy Rich had.
Yeah.
I would just watch that and be like, damn, that guy's a badass, you know, like, and just want to be like Buddy, man. Like, not personality wise, but like, you know, and it's so funny, man, because I've read so many things about him. And as a kid, I read like the Mel Torme book about Buddy Rich. And I read like, I forget the dude's name that wrote, I think it's like, man, I forget. He wrote this book called Drum and Men. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but it's like a really great book on, like, it starts with Chick Webb, you know, and it goes all the way up into like I think the early 50s big band guys.
Gotcha.
And then there's a second book he wrote out, and it's called Drum and Men 2, the bebop years. And it's all the bebop guys, you know. And, you know, I just would read everything about Buddy, you know, and you hear the tapes, you know, of him cussing out his band and, you know, but like from the interviews I've read, you know, and things I've seen, like he actually, you know, some people may not believe this, but like was probably one of like the best band leaders, because all he cared about was giving people, his audience, the best show that his band was capable of. And in his own way, him yelling at people, threatening to fire him, was his way of getting people fired up to say, like, well, screw you, man. I'm going to play my ass off tonight. And what are you going to say? You know what I mean? Like,
right. Yeah.
He was just trying to get the best out of his players. And like in the Mel Torme book, they talk about him, you know, like if you were sick, you know, he was a guy and you were on tour with Buddy, like he was in your room, like making sure you had chicken soup and making sure that you were taken care of. And like, you know, he took care of you, you know, like you were his guy, you know what I mean?
Sure. And
then he'd yell at you probably for, you know, making him take care of you. But you know what I mean? Like, you know, he was.
Well, he had high standards, as well he should. And, you know, when you're arguably the greatest drummer alive, you know,
yeah.
you can demand that your band be the greatest, you know, trumpet player or bass player or whatever the case may be.
Right.
He just had really high standards and demanded a lot of his guys. And, you know, you can't fault the guy for that because they were at the top of the heap for many, many years.
Oh, yeah, man. So getting back to my left hand, I know that was a long-winded sidetrack, but you can tell I love Buddy and I will defend him till the day I die as far as him being, you know, amazing. And literally my favorite drummer is Buddy Rich, you know, I mean, hands down. I mean, I love a lot of people, and it goes, for me, it's like Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa, like Dave Tuff, and then, you know, I'll have to say Al Jackson Jr. from Stax, and then Ringo Starr. And that's a tough one for me because I love both of those guys, but there's just something about Al's playing, man. Like for me, like on everything that he played, it was just absolutely perfect, you know?
Absolutely.
And he ran those sessions, man. You know, I've read a bunch of stuff with that. Like he was the guy that could call, like if something was not right, you know, he was like the only guy in the room, musician wise, you know, aside from the producer, that could say, wait a minute, this shit ain't right. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's pretty heavy, man, when you got like those kind of players in the room, you know what I mean? But all those guys had really good left hands, you know, and, you know, I just studied that, and I would practice on my, you know, my thighs, you know, with drumsticks.
Sure.
When there's no rebound off your leg. You know what I mean? Like I would practice double stroke rolls, like off my leg. Like that's what I would practice, would just be doing like rolls and paradiddles and like stuff that, you know, they tell you to use a bounce. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like learn to control the stick bounce. Well, on your leg or on a pillow, there's no bounce.
Right. Yeah. You're not going to do molar technique on a pillow. Yeah.
So like, that's how I would practice, man. And that's how I would practice at night in my room, because like my parents were like, okay, you know, the neighbors, your sister, we all need a break.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Enough drums for today. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would just go in my room and, you know, sit there and practice, you know, playing along to records or, you know, just playing rolls on my leg. You know what I mean? That's just what I did. And I didn't think like my master plan was in 20 years, I'm going to have this left hand that Josh Touchton's going to threaten to cut off. You know what I mean? Like, I was just like, well, I'll just practice here because it's quiet. You know what I mean? And like, then I realized like, holy and like I can play fast and I can play strong. You know what I mean? Like I can, I have a lot of power out of my left hand, and that's the only thing I can contribute to. That was just practicing on something that has zero bounce and doing, rolls.
Well, I mean, whatever it is you did, it worked wonders because, I mean, and I don't say it lightly, it's very impressive for a traditional grip player to be able to play with that power and fluidity that you possess. And, those things have all, kind of, led you to the gig that you're in now. But before we get to JD, I know you spent some time playing in, kind of a, how do I want to say this? A cult favorite for sure, Los Straitjackets. And,
yeah,
I live in central Kentucky, and you could almost set your calendar by, it's that time of year. Los Straitjackets is coming to town, and I don't care where Los Straitjackets was playing. It was a sellout. I mean, people just love that band. So tell us a little bit about how you ended up in that gig, and anything you want to share about that band.
Sure, man. I'd love to. That's some of my favorite touring years was in Los Straitjackets. Not to say that my touring years are over, but like I have really strong feelings towards those guys because it was really my first pro gig that I ever got. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like those guys treated me so well, and they still do. Like I'm still really good buddies with Eddie, Pete, Danny, our old manager, Jake. And I'm actually buddies with Jimmy Lester. Like, not that should be a surprise, but, I was the guy that replaced Jimmy Lester, and he still is an amazing drummer that I love to go and see whenever I have time off in Nashville. Cause he's just one of those guys, man, that is like, he's always gigging, and he's always like doing cool, he's the kind of guy that you go and watch, and like, he'll play this crazy fill and it's like totally awesome. And like, it's perfect. You know what I mean? Like, it'll be like, I guess the way to describe it is like, you ever listen to, there's that, Beyond the Sea, the Bobby Darin song.
Oh yeah, sure.
And there's those drum fills are just amazing. Like, they're just like,
yeah,
not like what you would expect, they're kind of out of left field. And I was once told that was Earl Palmer playing on that session. And then someone told me, no, it's actually Irv Kotler. I don't know who it is, but whoever it is, it's crazy. They do that crazy triplet, like it's like completely out of time, but nails it.
Yeah.
And everyone comes in on one. That's Jimmy. Like Jimmy does that all the time. And it's just like, I'll go watch him play and I'll be laughing because like, like he's the only guy I know that can play stuff like that and nail it like every time. Like never does he ever blow it. I've seen guys try to do it, and it's like, oh, come in on like sort of right. You know what I mean? And like, it's cool because like he's taking a risk, but Jimmy just does it. It's like his, he just does it naturally. And he's one of my favorite drummers, but, in replacing him was kind of it was really interesting part of my life because I was in this other band called the High Risers, and it was a rock and roll trio, original music stuff, and we were starting to tour, and we were on Eddie Angel, lead guitar player in Los Straitjackets, his own label. He's got a label called Spin Out Records.
Okay. And
I was playing in that band, and I was also working with this other band because once I started getting out on the road with guys that I liked, that's all I did. You know what I mean? I was like, oh man, I'm going to do this tour. I'm going to do that tour. So the High Risers worked, mainly around New York, New York City, and kind of regional, but one of the guys had, younger kids, and it was a little harder for him to tour. So we just did what we could do, and I started working with this other straight up rockabilly band that just was like our touring gig for me. And that guy, Mark, was really good buddies with Eddie. And Eddie knew who I was because I was on his label, but I'd never worked with him. So my buddy Mark was like, hey, Eddie, let's do a tour. it'll be my band, which was my buddy Mark, myself, and a bass player, and we'll back you up, and you can do like some of your solo stuff, or Los Straitjackets, whatever you want to do. And Eddie was like, oh, it's great. I'll be up in New York for the summer. We'll do some shows. And I was like, great. So I get sent 2 CDs worth of music that I got to learn, so I learn all this music. I meet Eddie finally, and super cool dude. And just love his playing. Amazing guitar player. And, we did the first show and him and I hit it off, just like dug the same stuff and he dug my playing and, just, it was great. It's like when you meet people that like you click with musically, it's cool, and you kind of know it pretty soon.
Absolutely.
Pretty early. And, I felt that way and I'm pretty sure he felt that way. And then he said, man, would the High Risers be interested in coming on the road, like doing a Los Straitjackets Christmas tour? And I said, sure. So I got to meet all those guys. We did like 3 weeks with them and it was great, man. It was really great. And, got to hang out with Jimmy and probably 3 or 4 months after that tour, I don't know like all the ins and outs, but basically Jimmy was coming off the road and was going to go back with Webb. And he also had his own business. He had like a business, still has a business in Nashville that's very successful. And I don't know like if there was more to it, but basically from what I was told, Jimmy was leaving the band because he had other commitments. He wanted to go back to play with Webb. Whatever, that's basically what I was told. So
right.
I got called from Eddie and he said, hey man, would you be interested in doing some dates with Los Straitjackets? And I said, yeah, I'd love it. And he said, okay. He's like, we got some things covered because we don't know what's going on. I think Jimmy's going back with Webb, and he's leaving the band. So he's like, I don't know if you're familiar with Lisa Pankratz, but she's another really great drummer out of Texas. She did some shows with them. And then he's like, she can't do some of the shows, so we're wondering if you could do these gigs. So I did a handful of gigs. And then like a week later, their manager called and said, hey, we'd like to offer you the gig.
That's huge.
The gig full time.
Huge.
And I was like, oh, really? And, he's like, yeah, man. He's like, all the guys know you. They've worked with you. You obviously know the music because you've worked with Eddie in the past, so can you do it? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, okay, well, next month, there's like, we got a gig backing up Eddie Clearwater, which was a really cool record they did, called, Rock and Roll City. And it was, Los Straitjackets backing up Eddie the Chief Clearwater, who's like the legendary Chicago blues guy.
Right.
And early rock and roll guy, actually.
Right.
And, like you got to learn his set. And then the next night you got to learn a set that they're going to back up Big Sandy, Robert Williams, because they've always done shows backing up Big Sandy. And then we're going to go to Mexico City and we got to do like a full band show. So I had like a month to learn 3 complete shows, of all, like all different material, and not just learn them, but like really learn them.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you can't, there's no Flubbenese because these were all festivals that we were playing that like, were big deals.
You're not faking your way through that.
No. And especially with the Straitjacket stuff, because it's instrumental. So like, there's no vocals you can cue yourself off of. There's no there's no lyrical content for you to base your like tempos off of. I don't know. I mean, I can sing a line in a song to get a tempo. You know what I mean? Like
sure.
When you're learning it, you can't do that. I mean, you can, if you know the melodies, you can do it. But like when you're learning 40 songs, it all starts to blend together. But you gotta know the songs just stone cold. Yeah. So I figured it out, man. And like, it was great. And then I was with that band for 6 years, man. It was a really, really fun run, man. It was like, went all over, man, with those guys. And it was, like you said, they had definitely have a cult following where, it's funny, a buddy of mine said, man, he goes, he's like, you don't realize, that gig. And I was like, what are you talking about? Of course I know what that gig is. He goes, no, man. He's like, a band like that, it's not when you get to the gig, people aren't thinking like, well, I wonder what this band's going to be like. It's like, I wonder what songs are going to play tonight.
Right.
And when he said that, it like totally sunk into me. I was like, oh man, like, you know, because once you start to know people in a band, like you think of it differently. It's not like when you go see a band and you don't know anybody, it's like, whoa, man, that band, you know, they're like, you know, it's like they're, you know, they could be like the Rolling Stones or something. Cause it's like that, you know,
right.
You don't see behind the curtain. You know what I mean? You see this kick-ass band that comes out and plays killer music and everything's perfect and you go home, you know, and then once you meet the guys, it's like, you know, it becomes a different thing. But, you know, it was like one of those things for me. It actually was better because like I got to know their personalities and then like learn, you know, like when I hear Eddie going for this, I know he's going to go for that. You know what I mean? And I can support him that way.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like,
oh, absolutely.
That's how I think, you know, and to me, that's why I love being in a band because it's not like nothing against guys that do the sideman role. And that's like, you know, a lot of jazz guys, that's like, they're always floating. But I get more personally out of like being able to read a guy on stage, like before he's even there. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
well, I mean, it's just developing that musical relationship and there's a certain amount of, you know, I call it telepathy. You know, it's kind of like, you know, exactly what your guitar player's gonna do before he ever does it. So that influences how you're getting ready to come into this chorus or this middle eight or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would imagine playing a gig like the Straitjackets, I mean, the catalog is so huge that, you know, I'm guessing no two gigs were the same, right?
Right. Well, they actually, you know, by the time I joined the band, I think they'd already been together like 13 or 14 years, you know, so they had developed kind of show standards, you know, that they had to do each night. What, you know, what the crowd, like basically, you know, there was probably 10 songs that if they didn't play, you know, people would complain.
Well, sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like when you're doing 75 to 90 minutes, you know, 10 songs is probably half your set. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like, you know, we would do certain songs for certain tours. You know what I mean? Like we would bring, you know, that was the other cool thing about that band, not to get sidetracked, but like they would go out and do a Christmas tour where they would do a whole different set of music for like a whole tour. And it was all Christmas music because they had a Christmas record out. And then when my years in the band, we recorded a second Christmas record. So we had like 20 songs that we could go out and play of just pure Christmas music, which is cool as hell in a rock and roll instrumental band. You know what I mean?
Sure. Well, and it's another way to stay busy and to monetize that music, right? I mean,
totally.
It's something different and special and it sells tickets.
Right. And, so, you know, we would do, I mean, there was definitely learning, material, like a lot of material for me to learn, but it kind of ended up becoming like, you know, we would do the standards and then because that band always records, man, they're always working in the studio on stuff.
Right.
Like we would do 10 of the classics, you know, and then 10 or whatever, you know, or however many of the new record that we're either working on or just finished. And so like, you know, like we would go back every once in a while and they'd be like, hey, let's try this one. And I'd be like, oh yeah, let me learn that one real quick. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
It was like, oh yeah, I'll go learn it, you know, like, and they would be like, oh, right. Well, you know, we'll do it in another day or something. But, you know, it was like it's pretty crazy. They have an insane amount of songs that they can go back and pull from. And that was one of the things too that I loved about that band is they were never like complacent. You know what I mean? Like they were always like, what's the next thing we're going to do? Oh, we're going to do a Halloween 45 with Southern Culture on the Skids. Okay, great. Oh, now we're going to do you know, now they've been doing stuff with like Nick Lowe. I think they might have done a full record with Nick Lowe already, or they're working on it. Maybe I just spoiled it, but I think it's already out. I think it's already out.
Hey, the secret's safe with me, so.
Yeah. No one will know. No, I think that's already out. But I know, and they just did a tour with Marshall Crenshaw. I mean, like, you know, they're just so cool, man. Like, they're really cool guys, and they're always like, hey, wouldn't it be cool to do a hot rod record with like Deke Dickerson? Well, then they did it. You know what I mean?
Right.
like they go from idea to product, like within it's, I remember Eddie joking with me one time, like, like shortly after I joined the band, and I'm like, oh man, this is really cool. Like, I'd get like a tour book sent to me, before the tour started with all the information, all the shows, all the drive times and this, I go, man, this is really cool. He goes, yeah, man, Jake runs this business like NASA, man, and Jake is their manager,
Right.
And when he said he runs it like NASA, man, like that just stuck with me forever. Cause, it's part in jest, but then also part in like, no, man, like Jake's really got this together, man. And like, Danny would put together, like, they'd get those tour books done and then Danny would print them out. Danny was the other guitar player. And he would print them out and they'd like be like this really nice, like, I used to keep them, you know what I mean? Cause it'd be like this nice, booklet, with a image on the front, and it would say the tour dates, and like each day was like, and I was just like, damn, man, that's so cool,
Right.
And, that was before iPhones and, Master Tour, the app. There's an app, it basically does the same thing, but no one has to do anything but fill in information and, but
right. If there's a schedule change, you just get a text message on your phone and it's like, lobby call is at 8 instead of 9, don't be late for the bus. Yeah.
Right. So, so that was like such a amazing time for me. And I can't express that enough. Like, those guys really took me from being in a band that was a really great band, the High Risers, that it was touring regionally, but they took me to like a level of, professionalism that like I hold very dear to me. Those guys did everything right. You never were like chasing people down for, the lobby call. Like everyone was pro, you know what I mean? Like it was just such a well-run experience, especially from my very first tour where like you never knew what was going to happen when the Western Swing Band, if who was going to be on the gigs or if we were going to make the gigs, was the van going to make it? Was the band going to implode by the time we got to the gig? You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
So, to where like, it was just like super cool. And like, you could go record store shopping and you could just, yeah, man, we'll get to the gig and, we got this amount of time and, the hotels are, you know what I mean? Like just totally, yeah, everything was worked out, man. And those guys, and I benefited, man, from all their hard work because they did the hard work before I joined that band, and developed that, as you said, cult following of really good fans that were like just ready at every gig. And, it was awesome, man. It was an awesome gig.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a great experience and being a part of a well-oiled machine like that. I mean, it sets you up for kind of the next chapter in your life. Which let's talk a little bit about your current gig now. I understand that you guys are getting ready to head to Europe here just any second now. I hope I'm not keeping you from packing your bags, but
oh no, I do that the hour before I leave. Are you kidding? Man, I pretty much have had a suitcase 3/4 of the way packed for the last 20 years of my life, man.
Yeah.
My wife and I were talking about that one night. We were out to dinner with friends of ours and someone said, man, it's like, do you get nervous about traveling or like, about packing your suitcase? And I said, no, I pretty much have had a suitcase packed for, and then my wife and I looked at each other and we're like, wow, going on like 20 years, man. Like, it's kind of scary to think about, but like, so I put that off to the last minute, but no, we leave on Wednesday for about 4 weeks.
Okay.
And that's with JD. And, so the JD gig, man, this was really cool. I was in Los Straitjackets and we would always, Chicago was one of our big markets, and, I got to know Jimmy Sutton, who's a really great bass player, really dear friend of mine, Chicago native. And, we became total buddies, man, because he would always come out and sometimes we'd stay at his house, or, he had this really great house in Chicago and they would always have like cookouts if we were there in the summer, and I met a lot of musicians through Jimmy and that's how I met JD. We were coming through with Los Straitjackets and me and Eddie showed up at a gig after our gig. Jimmy's a great bass player. I think I already said that, but like a little known fact about Jimmy is Jimmy's a really good guitar player as well. He had this band, called Jimmy Sutton and his rock and roll guitar. And they would play I think he had like one gig. He had like a steady Sunday gig at this place in Chicago. And it was like a late gig. It was like a 10 to 2 or 11 to 2. It was like a late night, like gig. It wasn't after hours, but like a lot of musicians would show up there because, a lot of things would be over and people would go there and hang out or whatever. And me and Eddie played a gig and we were like, man, it's early. It was like, we played for some reason it was like it was a Sunday. So we did like a matinee or something at Fitzgerald's, this really good club in Chicago. And, we were like just chilling and we were like, man, something's gotta be going on a Sunday in Chicago, So I don't know, he thought of it or I thought of it. We're like, oh, let's go check out Jimmy, So we went and saw Jimmy's band play. And, it was really cool, man. It was a really fun night. And he goes, man, you got to check out this new guy I'm recording, this guy from Oklahoma. And we're like, oh, sure, man. So he played us some of the Signs and Signifier record before it was even mixed. It was just like they had just started doing some tracking. And I was like, man, that's really cool. And Eddie was like, man, that's really cool. And then, find out it was JD, and Jimmy's like, yeah, he had this other band, the Starkweather Boys, and Eddie was like, oh man, I saw them at a festival, in Spain a couple years ago. They were great, And Jimmy's like, yeah, he contacted me. He said he had some songs and he wanted to come to Chicago and record them in my studio. So we're doing this project, And then I don't know, like a year later, Jimmy called me and said, hey man, I think we're going to do a gig. I got this gig going with JD. We're finishing that record and we're starting to put together stuff. If the opportunity comes up, would you be interested in playing some drums on some shows? And I said, yeah, man. And a little backstory on that was Jimmy and I had talked for years, probably 2 or 3 years, about him and I doing something on the side from Los Straitjackets or his thing, like starting something, because he dug my playing, I dug his playing. But I lived in New York at the time. He lived in Chicago. So it's kind of like one of those things you're like, man, if it ever came up, this would be great. We would love to do this, And he's like, I'm still trying to figure out a way to get something going with you. And he's like, I got this thing with JD, and he doesn't really have a band. We're not sure what's going to happen. It's probably just going to be some festival stuff here and there because he's a teacher. He's still teaching at the time. And he's like, but, if you're interested, maybe it'll work out. I said, great. So then about a week or two later, he called me. He goes, hey, man, I actually got offered this gig in Seattle. It's not with JD, but JD's going to do it. Can you do it? And I couldn't because it was like Los Straitjackets was going on the road. And I was like, so bummed out. You know what I mean? Because I was like, oh man, this would have been the first time we've ever got to do this master plan that we've been, scheming on for years, And he's like, don't worry, man. He's like, I get it. It'll happen. And I'm like, yeah, no problem. Well, then 6 months later, he calls me and goes, hey man, so the record's done. It's out. And I think we had done a show with JD and Jimmy, and he was using Alex Hall on drums, who was also the engineer on the first record, and some other Chicago guys on a gig in Chicago with Los Straitjackets. Those guys opened up, and I saw the band and I dug it, Well, he called me and said, hey man, a bigger label is picking up the record. We got management. JD needs a band. Are you interested in doing some touring? And I said, well, if, my schedule at Los Straitjackets permits, I would love to. And he's like, great. He's like, I'll be back in touch. We're putting some stuff together. Hopefully you can do it. And I was like, great. And as luck would have it, they were doing like a 2 or 3 week tour of Europe. And like Los Straitjackets had just finished a record. So we weren't touring yet. We were waiting to get the record out. And, there's always that lead time between them when a record's finished and it comes out. And, and you don't want to go out and play right away because when the record comes out, then you're going to play. You don't want to overplay your market, the drill.
Sure.
So I'm looking at like 3 months off, or like 2 months off of time. That tour fell in like the beginning of it, and I took it and it was great. Like me and JD hit it off, and, playing with Jimmy was great. And they said, hey man, we got another tour in the States. Would you be interested in doing that? And I said, yeah, depending on when it is. And they said, well, it's going to be in December. And it was either right before or right after Los Straitjackets Christmas tour, or they weren't doing a Christmas tour or something. It fell into place again where I was free.
Yeah, your window was open.
My window was open. The door was open, so I jumped through it, And we went out and did it, and it was great. And it was really fun. It was a really fun tour because it was just a 3-piece band, which is hard to believe now because it's more like a 5-piece band with pianos and organs and,
right.
Saxophone and multiple guitarists. And, it's a huge operation now. But the first tour in the States was me, Jimmy, and JD bombing around in my van, just going from town to town, playing. Some places Jimmy would know a saxophone player and we'd have them sit in and they would play, but generally it was a 3-piece band. And,
man, I wish I'd have caught that tour.
Yeah.
when you're telling that story, it's like, wow, how cool would it have been to see it in that kind of setting, as a 3-piece and just kind of bumming around in a van, like you said.
Yeah, it was great, man. It was we had so much fun. I remember one of JD's buddies was with us for a while, kind of helping out, doing tour managing stuff, or, just selling merch, and I've become really good buddies with him. And, it's it was just one of those tours where it was great. It was a lot of fun. And you were like, man, this could really be something, this, the reception was really good. And it was just unique, we've never played again as a trio since then. We instantly, well, I'll finish that. So we get done with that tour and it was great. And JD and Jimmy were like, man, I think this may work, cause you just never know what's going to happen, man. You could get on the road and people could be like, no way,
right.
Don't dig it.
Yeah.
The record's great. Don't like the live show or whatever, man. Or it just doesn't work musically amongst the 3 guys or whatever. And so I went back on the road with Los Straitjackets for a little while, and then they called me again and said, hey, man, we're doing South by Southwest. Can you do it? And I was like, sure, I'm off. So I went down and did it, and we played a couple shows. And at the end of that, that tour, I got home, and then JD called me and goes, hey, man, we really want you to join the band. And we got a booking agent now, and we got, our management's all solidified, and we're going full speed ahead, and we really want you to join the band. And I was jumping for joy in one emotion. And then the other emotion was I don't know if I can leave Los Straitjackets. You know what I mean?
Well, sure. I mean, that's a huge decision to leave something that you've been in that long, that's successful. It's, you know what it is. You're going to make a living doing it, right?
Right. Yeah.
To go with the unknown that, could be a better opportunity, or it could, grind to a halt in 6 months. That's a
right.
Tough call, man.
And, it was one of those things where I just I had this gut feeling, about man, I think this is really I think this could take off. You know what I mean?
Right.
And another thing was I'm going through all this, and I'm talking to my wife, and she's like, you have the upper hand in this, because a lot of times when people make a career move, they don't know what they're really getting into until they're there for 6 months. She's like, you've been touring with these guys for about a year on and off.
Right. You know what you're buying. Yeah.
Yeah. These guys what they're like on the road. You've known Jimmy, for years now, and you've been working with them. So you kind of know what you're getting into, and yeah, could be a step back as far as security wise, because those, like you said, Straitjackets are a well-established band. They do great. They, record, and, everything is a plus, everything. There's no but then there's this ugly side to it. There was none of that with Los Straitjackets. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was kind of just a great gig through and through. And I'm like, well, I haven't seen any bad side of, the JD thing. And, I like all the guys. I like the music. And, my wife was like, then you should just do it. Go for it. We're still, it's not like you know, it's going to be, I don't know, like you can still do something different if this doesn't work out. Like, I mean, you're young enough in your career where, you know, but you've been around enough to where like you can still, you know, do other things, but people know who you are, and, you know, I think you're going to be fine. And I'm like, yeah, I think I need to do it, you know? And, I got to tell you, man, it was the hardest call I ever had to make. Like, you know, all I can say is like breaking up with like a girlfriend or, you know, something, a significant other, you know what I mean, was what it felt like when I was calling my old manager in Eddie and explaining to him that I was leaving the band, because I was so close with all those guys, you know?
Well, yeah.
And it was their manager was so great, man, Jake. And I still talk to him on a regular basis, you know. He goes, that's a two-sided answer. He goes, my first answer from a friendship standpoint is I couldn't be happier. He's like, because I think that guy's got some potential. I think it's a good move, you know, for you. Worst case, it's a lateral move, but he goes, I don't even think it's that, you know what I mean? He goes, I think it's like, it's a good fit for you. Like musically, it's like a good fit. Like, I think you're going to do well. And I think he's got like a pretty good, you know, outlook, you know, JD's music in his career. Like, I think it's going to be fine. You know, I think you're going to do great. He goes, as a manager, I hate you. Cause he's like, I don't want to lose you.
Right.
Like, you know, you've become a part of the family. You're my friend, you know, and to know that you're leaving is a tough thing, you know, and it was really hard for me because I really loved every one of those guys, and I still do. And it was like, it was a mind thing, you know, it was like, you know, you just go from what you know and what you love to something that you really like, but it's new, and you're like, oh, am I doing the right thing? And then, you know, once I got in the swing of it full time, you know, like it's been great, man. It's like, I love these guys as much as I love, you know, playing with Los Straitjackets. You know, it's obviously a totally different band, and I don't play a drum solo on every song or sort of a drum solo on every song, you know. It's like, it's back to like, more of my R&B roots, man, you know, of like being able to just play a groove, you know. I mean, we're playing songs, but you know what I mean? It's not like the flashy,
Sure.
you know, like I remember at one point the bass player in Los Straitjackets, Pete, who's also a really good drummer, I should add, said to me, he goes, if there's a hole, fill it, you know. And he was like, you know, he was joking, but he was serious, you know what I mean? He's like, in this band, there's no vocalist. So like at any given moment, who's ever soloing is the vocalist. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like if there's a hole and you can come up with something cool, you should do it. You know what I mean? Cause like no one's going to tell you not to, you know? And it was great, man. Like that's what every, you know, 20-year-old drummer wants to hear when they join a band. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're not too loud.
Right. The gloves are off.
Yeah. I remember him saying like, hey man, so if we play a fast song, make it really fast. And if we play a slow song, make it medium tempo. You know, like, he was so funny to me, man. Like, you know, and I was like, okay, man, you know, like no problem, you know, like, and that was a cool thing too. Is they didn't want me to try and mimic Jimmy. You know, they're like, you're not, you know, we don't want to, like, Jimmy did his thing and Jimmy's great and you can't play like Jimmy and we don't expect you to play like Jimmy. We want you to play like you and develop your own thing. And I was like, that's really cool too, man. Like, you know, certain bands, you know, you have to play exactly what's been played for 20 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And those guys were like, don't do that. Don't worry about what Jimmy did because that's Jimmy. And, you know, we're not hiring you to try and be another Jimmy. We're hiring you to be you. And, you know, and that's
the greatest feeling in the world is when your new band says, you come in, you be you. You don't have to, you know, be a carbon copy of the record or last tour or whatever. That's really refreshing.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's great too. And I'm sure that when I left and Chris Bragg took my place, I'm sure they said the same exact thing to him. You know what I mean? Because they're just great musicians and they know that like they're going to get the best out of you when you're comfortable, and you're only comfortable when you can be yourself. You know what I mean?
That's right. Absolutely.
And they were great about that. So that is, also part of like the whole thing for me with being in Los Straitjackets. It just opened my eyes so much to what like a pro band, like a truly professional band, wants to get the best out of their players. You know what I mean? And they're not going to put you into, into parameters that may not suit you. You know what I mean? They're like, you're a good player. You've made the cut in the band or whatever. You know what I mean? Now you just be you.
Absolutely.
And that was great, And then the cool thing about with JD is, aside from not being on the first record, I've been the guy in the band. You know what I mean? So like I've kind of like made my own. You know what I mean? Like I'm kind of like I've been able to kind of work my own, come up with my own ideas, as far as like, for my parts, or if JD hears a part and he says, hey man, try something like this, and then it usually becomes like a mix of like what he hears in what I can play. You know what I mean? Cause like, when someone describes something, it's like sometimes they don't describe it the way their mind hears it. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I know what you mean.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Cause it's like, and that's the cool thing is like those, this band is really, it's very, it's fun. I've got to be a part of the records, you know what I mean? In help, develop my parts. And I know like a lot of bigger bands, that doesn't happen. They have sung, there's songwriters and there's studio musicians and then there's a touring band. And in this band, I've been a part of, of the second and third records, and the 45s that have come out and other things that we've released. It's been great to be in the studio and come up with stuff and help, finalize arrangements. And, it's great. It's like I've continued on the same thing that I had with Los Straitjackets now with JD, and it's been great, man.
Absolutely. Well, the new record, Undivided Heart and Soul, it's a fantastic record. I mean, and I'm not just, blowing smoke. It's a really good record. And, the first single, when I'm cruising around, I listen to outlaw country on satellite radio a lot. Lucky Penny, man. I mean, it's on all the time, and it's
that's great.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a great song. And the groove that you play in it is just perfect for what JD does. And our show is primarily consumed by drummers, so a lot of folks may not know about JD, but I mean, he is a bona fide guitar whiz, and I'm assuming, I don't know this, but I'm assuming he's coming in with a riff or an idea or a certain, sound texture and says, okay, man, you come up with a groove to this, right?
Yeah. That's basically on that song, he's like, what do you hear? And I said, well, and he actually brought that up to my house in Nashville. We got together, before, he was getting ideas together to do this record. This was probably like in September, man. I had just moved into Nashville, and he was already here, and we were starting to get stuff together to record. And he played me this riff, and he was like, what do you hear? And I go, well, obviously I hear a shuffle at first because of the way he was chugging, you know what I mean? Sure. Like on the, on the choruses and stuff. And I'm like, I hear that, but I don't know if that's necessarily what you're thinking. He said, nah. He's like, it's got to be something different. Like, we got to come up with something different. And I was like, well, what about this groove? And I played him the groove that I played on the record, which is like, I won't tell you the source of that groove, but it's kind of a legendary, like, it's not like a Walk This Way or a, breakbeat thing, but it's sort of like there was a certain, Godfather of Soul. And, there was a song where they did this breakdown, and I don't know if it was a breakdown or if it was like a live version, which isn't like the record version. It's like a live thing. And they did this one song and they had sped it up. and it was like, I could never quite get what they were playing because, there's two drummers and it's live, but I would like play along to that as a kid, and I would come up with this groove that, like when you playing along with something and you're like, well, I know this isn't exactly right, but this still works.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, man, I do it every day.
Yeah, me too. But I had that groove in my back pocket, man. Like I've always kind of done it, like sort of at sound checks or something, like it's kind of like a funky, R&B groove with like, I don't know, just like this weird groove. And, so I played that, and he was like, he just like freaked out, man. He's like, yeah, that's it. That's great. I love that, So we did that, and then, and I told this story to, another interviewer I did. We were in the studio, and, we ended up putting breaks in that song. There's those drum breaks in the guitar solo. And, this is a guilty pleasure, even though I was like obsessed with Buddy Rich and all these jazz guys, like I love Ginger Baker. I just think he's like amazing, which I shouldn't say guilty pleasure, but like it might be one of those things where people would be like, wow, that guy's like talking about Buddy Rich and Davey Tough, but then like Ginger Baker. I mean, but he's such a great drummer. I mean, and he's a jazz guy, man. Like, I mean,
yeah,
it may not come across in Cream, but like if you do any reading or any video, any video interviews with him, he's like a total jazz nut, you know what I mean? And
sure,
like, so like I was obsessed with him as a kid, and he would do like these really cool tom fills, and I did it once. Like I was like, oh man, I don't know what to play, and the engineer Danny was like, I don't know, man, do some of those incredibly increased, roles that you can play, like just do that, that would be killer, and I was like, yeah, I don't know, like kind of like it just wasn't like speaking to me, but I think I did that. I think there's some outtakes where I'm going completely bonkers, but I was like, man, I'm gonna do like, I go, I was talking back to them in the booth, and I was like, man, I'm gonna try a pass with like some Ginger Baker fills, And I did it, and like I think JD came running out, and he's like, "That is it. You have to do that. Those are it. Like just keep doing that. We want like a whole bank of those, So I did a couple passes with like a bunch of different fills, and I kept coming back to the ones that are on the record. You know what I mean? Like I kept coming, like just simple, man. Like boneheaded, the flams, or like the flammy type triplets,
Sure.
Brum, 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 like it's like. Just total Ginger Baker, my interpretation of like, those double bass Ginger Baker fills that he would do around all the toms, and, yeah, man. So that's like a mix of,
well, it works perfectly. I mean, it really does. And I mean, it's just such a good groove, and I mean, it's a great song. I mean, it really is. And, you guys played it on Conan. I caught you guys on Conan O'Brien's show doing the song, and man, it's just an awesome groove, and I'm sure that it translates really well in front of a live audience as well,
Yeah, man, that one, that was a really fun, foot in the water kind of thing, man. When we were starting to do new material, JD was coming up with stuff. When we started playing that at live shows before it was out, it was like you could, like the crowd would react to that one really well. And he'd be like, I don't know, man. I don't know about, because each record has been, the first one is a, R&B, I hear that as an R&B record to me, like a straight Chicago R&B record, Signs and Signifier.
Right.
And a lot of people say, oh, it's a rockabilly record. And it's like, well, not really, man. Like this band, like I know we have upright bass and they're slapped, but I mean, Jimmy's like a Willie Dixon, fanatic, you know what I mean? And all those great Willie Dixon recordings, that's all R&B stuff, man. And that's slap all over that stuff, and, they've never really considered themselves as a rockabilly band. It's more been an R&B band. And, but, some of the covers we would play are undeniably covers of rockabilly music, but as original music stuff goes, it's always been like an R&B thing in a real traditional sense. And, the second record kind of pushed the envelope a little bit more of the rock and roll thing. And then this third record is kind of like, yeah, we're a rock and roll band now.
Yeah, for sure.
It's kind of like, yeah, like, let's not deny ourselves, the fact that like we're all secretly listening to like, all kinds of music, not just, strict R&B stuff, which we all love and still geek out about, but like there's this other side. And, when we were writing this record and JD was writing these songs, that's what the band was into, you know what I mean? And it's like, we sort of bridged that gap on some of the record with, songs like Bloodhound Rock. That's an R&B burner, man. That's like a straight up rhythm and blues rocker. You know what I mean? And, I think there's like some of the sort of 12/8-ish, like New Orleans-y, R&B stuff kind of bridged the gap between the first record and the second record and the second record and the third record. And, but it's, it's like, I love the fact that like he is true to himself and the band is true to the band. Not like, well, we had really good success, so let's just rewrite the first record again, or let's rewrite the second record. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, man, we have to play what's true to us, and that's what we would expect from other musicians that we love. So that's what we did. And, people have been really, really digging it, and it's kind of like awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
That like you can do what you love and people still like it.
It is awesome. It's a fantastic record. I mean, I love them all, but the new record, fantastic record. For anybody yeah, absolutely. For anybody that doesn't have it, go find it and go see these guys as they're out on the road. It's a great show. I mean, it really is. Jason, we've taken up far too much of your time, but it's a tradition here on the Drum Shuffle. You have to give all of the guys and gals that are listening, we ask everybody, what's the one good piece of advice you can share with everybody, whether it's playing technique or how to get further in the business? Give us your piece of advice.
Man, I can tell you, this is something that I was told when I was. This is a theory that I was told in Los Straitjackets, and it's, if you want to be successful in the music business, there's two things. The first one's kind of a joke, but it's also true. You have to get up before noon in the music business if you want to be successful. You have to get up before noon. And the second piece is, do what you love. And, stick with it and don't waver, because at some point, you'll end up being the guy that when people want what you do, you'll be the guy that they want, because you know what I mean? Like if you love playing, sort of like Afro-Cuban jazz, you know what I mean? Just go for it, like wholeheartedly. Listen to it, play it, love it, and perform it and perfect it. And then someday the top, Afro-Cuban jazz band is going to need someone, or there's going to be someone that needs that type of music. And if you develop this reputation of being this guy that's what he does, then, you're going to build a career around it. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
You know what I mean? Like if you just keep saying like, well, I can, like I love, Latin music, but, country music right now is really hot. So maybe I should join a country band. You might get a gig in a country band. You'll probably get a gig in a country band, but sooner or later you're going to hate it because it's not what you love. And it's going to come out and you're playing, or people are going to be like, man, that guy's not really a country drummer. And then next thing you know, you don't have a gig. Yeah. But if you stick with what you love, you'll work your way up, man. Like things will, if you stick with it, it's kind of like the last man standing. You know what I mean? If you don't give up and you stick with it and you keep honing your skills, eventually, your day will come, man. Or you'll create your own day because you'll be so good that, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense, and I think it's a great piece of advice. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say you're never going to see Jamie Eads or Jason Smay in a thrash metal band.
Probably not, man.
Right.
Probably not.
So I mean, it's very true. You have to be true to yourself and do what you do. And if you do what you do, it will lead to something eventually. But do your own thing. I think that's great advice. Yeah. Jason,
it really is, man.
Jason, man, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really do appreciate it. I want to wish you the best of luck on the run through Europe. I know that's a heck of a flight, man. So
yeah. Gives me a chance to catch up on overdue reading.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that's one good side effect of it. But you guys have a good run over there, and come back on the show sometime. Let us know how the tour went, and we'd love to have a sneak preview of the next record when it comes time. You're
okay, man. You're
welcome on this show anytime, brother.
Oh man, I really appreciate you having me on. I really do, and let's stay in touch for sure.
Absolutely. I will be in touch very soon. Thanks so much, Jason.
Thank you.
All right. See you now.
See ya.
All right, everybody. That's going to wrap up episode number 12 of the Drum Shuffle. Keep your emails coming. We love hearing from you. We love to answer your questions throughout the week. We love hearing your comments and suggestions for future episodes of the show. Our email address is thedrumshufflepodcast@gmail.com. The web address is thedrumshuffle.com. And you can always find more information about me at jamieeads.com. You are absolutely going to want to hit that subscribe button on whatever service you're listening into. We have some fantastic guests coming up in future episodes of the Drum Shuffle. Want you to tune in. We thank you sincerely for doing so. We are continuing to grow, and we can't do any of that without you guys. So we are genuinely thankful to have all of you tuning in week after week. As always, until next time, may your heads stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers.